Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Rifkin. I'm a social and economic theorist, and I'm an author. I advise heads of state and has done so for the last 40 years on making the transition out of a dying age of progress into an emerging age of resilience. And most importantly, moving out of a fossil fuel culture and into a zero emission renewable energy society. Uh, Most importantly, I advise the European Union leadership, the People's Republic of China, and more recently, the United States Senate on the transition plans so that we can begin to address the crucial crisis of our time, real-time climate change. I wrote this book, Planet Opera, Rethinking Our Home in the Universe, because frankly, all of us, we have misunderstood the planet we live on. We've long thought we live on a land planet. And that's taken us to a crisis now, climate change and an extinction event. What we need to relearn is that we live on a water planet. And now the hydrosphere, which determines all of life on this planet, is rewilding because of climate change. What happens is for every 1 degree Celsius, the temperature goes up on this planet from global warming emissions. The atmosphere is sucking up 7% more precipitation from the oceans, the lakes, the soil into the atmosphere. So we're getting more concentrated precipitation in the clouds and wild water events. So in the winter, we see these massive atmospheric rivers, and they're pouring massive snowfalls into areas that have never seen snow. In the spring, we're getting flooding across every continent. In the summer, we're getting heat waves, and we're getting temperatures of 110, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. We can't live in that. Then we're getting wildfires across the whole planet. The fall, we're getting hurricanes. So what's happening is, after 2 centuries of the industrial age and spewing massive amounts of fossil fuels in the atmosphere, we're in now an extinction event. I spent about 25 years in the United States working on the issue of climate change and how we make the transition out of a fossil fuel, industrial-based capitalist system, if you will. Back in around 2000, Romano Prodi, who was then president of the European Commission, former prime minister of Italy, came to DC and said, look, Jeremy, we need to have you come to Europe for the next 25 years. And I took him up on it. And we did something very interesting. We asked an anthropological question at that time. How do the great economic paradigm shifts in history occur? If we know how they occur, maybe we can get a roadmap for how we can transition our society into a more flourishing era in history. And what we found out is really, really very, very important. There have been a handful of great paradigm shifts in history. Every one of them has the same common denominator, that at a moment of time, 4 defining technologies emerge across a society. A lot of times it's serendipitous, and they create a new infrastructure that fundamentally changes the way we organize our whole way of life. What are they? Number 1, new energy revolutions. Number 2, new communication revolutions. Number 3, new sources of mobility and logistics. Number 4, new ways of organizing water. When these 4 areas create new technologies, they fundamentally change the way society is organized. They change our governance, they change our economic paradigms, they change our temporal spatial orientation, even the way we educate our kids. This is going to be difficult for us to accept, but here's the real issue. After spending so many decades on this, I've come to the conclusion the problem is our playbook. What's happening now is everybody is scared to death all over the world. Parents are wondering, what are their children going to have a world to live in the 21st century? The floods, the droughts, the heat waves, the wildfires brought on by a fossil fuel industrial age. Our young people don't know if they're going to get married. They don't know if they're going to have children. We now have millions of people that are now migrating out of areas they can't live in anymore and searching for new places to live. So we're in an extinction event, and our scientists tell us that we could lose over half the species inhabiting this little planet in the lifetime of today's babies. We won't see them or hear them again. These species have been here for millions of years. The last extinction event on Earth was 65 million years ago. We're now talking about the lifetime of everyone today in the next 50 years. So we have to have a new playbook. Here's the problem. We're using a playbook from the age of progress, and that playbook is what's taken us to an extinction event. It's the way we relate to nature, how we educate our children in the school systems, the way we approach our science and technology, how we organize our economic life. It's that playbook that's taken us to this extinction. So we have to rethink the playbook. We have to rethink how we relate to science, technology, education, how we organize our economic life, our concepts of nature. And primarily, we have to understand that we live on a water planet, not a land planet. We are born in water. You know, the little fetus in water is 90% water in the fetus. 60% of our bodies when we're an adult is water. Without water, there's no oxygen for the atmosphere because it's the phytoplankton in the oceans that create the oxygen that goes in the atmosphere. Without water, we can't have the lithosphere or the biosphere. So what's happened is we've got to have a new playbook and understand that we live on a water planet and begin to rethink all of the categories of life that we live on to live on that. It's both the greatest crisis in history. We're in an extinction event, but it's the greatest opportunity. Crisis creates opportunity. So what we're beginning to see is all of the rudiments of a completely new approach to economics, technology, how we relate to nature, the way we educate our kids. And it's going to create the new business opportunities, the new employment. And most importantly, it's going to give us hope that we can flourish by relearning how to live on a water planet and be able to understand our relationship to all our fellow creatures on this little orb in the universe we call planet Aqua. Especially in relationship to all the current elections going on across the planet. What's happening is this. We're beginning to realize that we are in trouble. Climate change is telling us that this planet is changing in ways that we do not understand, and that we're much smaller than we thought, our little species. And this planet is much more powerful than we ever anticipated. That's a big wake-up call. We've got a younger generation, the Gen Zs, and you know, they've gone out on these demonstrations, leaving their schools on Fridays in 141 countries, millions of these young people. And here's the positive thing. These protests of these young people about our problems on this planet, these aren't like any protests in history. We've protested all through history on all sorts of issues. This is different. This is the first time an entire generation of young people across the world, millions of them, they're coming out on the streets calling for a climate emergency, to rethink our playbook. And they see themselves as an endangered species. That's never happened. Across all the geopolitical boundaries, we have a whole generation that sees themselves as an endangered species. And they see their fellow creatures as part of their evolutionary family. They're beginning to empathize with life itself. And what they're doing is they're challenging a dying geopolitical world, and a world where industry is too concentrated, in a world where a handful are doing well and the rest are not. So this is a big metamorphosis change, and it's a very positive change. And so what I'm saying is learning to live on a water planet is the way we introduce a new way to flourish in the years to come. And what's interesting, it's beginning to happen all over the world. In Europe, and I advise the European Union again, they're now talking about a blue deal to go with the Green Deal. In China, the same thing. And now there's conversations in America. So there's a lot of positive things going on. And we have a younger generation now who sees themselves as a species and their fellow creatures as part of the family. There couldn't be better news. Now, we have to begin to change our educational system, how we approach our scientific pursuits, how we arrange our technologies. All of this has to change. None of this in the book is theory. All of what we're talking about is actually in practice. I've spent many decades with leading industries and entire regions of the world where we have been able to make these transitions. So now we have to begin to see that geopolitics is dying, biosphere politics is emerging, where we're going to begin to see nations crossing their political boundaries and sharing common ecosystems and learning how to replenish those ecosystems. We're going to begin to see a lot of very, very fundamental changes. And what I would say to grandparents, parents, and young people going into the workforce, there is hope, but it's going to mean rolling up our sleeves for generations now and relearning and pivoting and how we actually become a part again of a planet that's the water planet of the universe. We do not want life to die on this little experiment in the Milky Way. And so I wrote Planet Aqua, Rethinking Our Home in the Universe, because I hope it'll stimulate younger generations to know there is a future. But we have to really rethink the entire playbook on how we live on a water planet. Well, you know, I wrote a book that was published in 1995 called The End of Work. And it created a debate, which is still going on, is are we going to be replaced? In other words, at that point, the internet was coming in, the early stages of AI was emerging. And of course, over the years since, that debate has deepened. Let me say this. What's happening now is that yes, we have AI, we have all the new developments there, but in order to rethink our relationship on the planet, it's going to require something that AI can't do. There is a mission for AI, but it's a limited mission. Where we're going to see AI as helpful is in helping to put together the infrastructure for a third industrial revolution for the age of resilience. The communication internet, the solar and wind energy internet, hydrogen internet. Number 3, the electric vehicle and fuel cell mobility internet for transport. Number 4, the water microgrid internet. All of these internets require big data, analytics, and algorithms so that they can work together for our infrastructure. And if this sounds like common sense, it's kind of interesting, actually. It is common sense because everyone I'm talking to now has taken biology in high school, right? All right. So every organism has to have a means to communicate, some source of energy thermodynamically to stay alive. Number 3, it has to have mobility or motility, so it has movement, even plants. And 4, it has to have water. So these great infrastructure revolutions in history are social organisms. They allow large numbers of our population to come together in very complex ways in order to communicate, have a source of energy, have some form of mobility and logistics, and some kind of approach to water to manage their lives. Not in any textbooks. I wrote about it in the Third Industrial Revolution book, the Age of Resilience book, and now Planet Aqua. But these infrastructure revolutions are basically social organisms. And they determine our kind of governance, our economic life, our social life, the whole works. Governments don't create the infrastructures. Technology is kind of serendipitous. It just happens. And those new infrastructures then determine the possible governing ways you could use it, the possible ways to organize the economic life. This is all exciting stuff. It's emerging. I spent the last 22 years with the leadership of the EU. We're moving toward it. The last 12 years with the People's Republic of China, we're moving toward it. The last few years through my work with Senator Majority Leader Charles Schumer on the Build Back Better plan, but it's got to move quicker. And so it's hard for you to hear this because we have this entire phalanx, this whole way we organize our life, communication, energy, mobility, logistics, which is going out, and the new era is coming in. So let me share one quick short anecdote. I taught the advanced management program at the Wharton School, the oldest business school in the world, for 15 years. I was a student there before that in the 1960s. We bring in business leaders from all over the world for 5 weeks of training. And so the first day I would say to them, I want you to go back to your dormitory tonight and think about the worst crisis that could face your company on your watch as president of a global company. Then report back the next day. They do. Second day, I say, I want you to go back to your dormitory night and think of the worst crisis that could confront your company and how that's your biggest opportunity. Crisis creates opportunity. We're in the biggest crisis in history. After 250,000 years, we are now in an extinction event in real time. The floods, the droughts, the heat waves, the wildfires, the hurricanes. We need opportunity because the entire infrastructure of this planet for the last 200 years of the industrial age, it's all a stranded assets. The dams are going, if you will. The soil underneath the ground is now, because of the heat, is decaying. The whole infrastructure is going. So, but it's also an opportunity to roll up our sleeves again and actually create a completely new approach to the way we live on this planet and all the business opportunities and employment opportunities, and especially opportunities for our species and fellow creatures to flourish again. But we'd have to rethink the book. For example, we talk about growth. There's no such thing in nature as growth. That's a fiction of the amount of the industrial age. Growth is about flourishing. I mean, nature flourishes. It doesn't grow, it flourishes. In nature, there's no such thing as productivity. It's regenerativity. And so when you take a look at the way we've organized life, it's at odds with the way nature operates, and we are part of the natural world. We have to reacquaint ourselves and come back into the fold of a water planet and a great, if you will, living planet in this Milky Way that we live in. This may be hard to hear, but we're going to have to rethink the role of the nation state. What we've got right now is all these countries are fighting each other because we are in the last stage of a geopolitical world and everybody's trying to hold on. All right. So there's a huge amount of struggle going on across all the societies on this planet. All right. What we realize now is that climate events don't care about political boundaries. The floods, the droughts, the heat waves, the wildfires, the hurricanes, they affect ecosystems. So what's happening is that just in practice, we're beginning to move from a geopolitical world to a biosphere world where we're beginning to cross political boundaries. We're not giving up nation states, but if you share a common ecosystem across a national boundary, a regional boundary, a transnational boundary, people are starting to work together at the local level to share that common ecosystem and be a steward of it. All right. Rather than seeing nature as a resource, we're now seeing it as a life source. That's a huge, huge shift. And so, for example, there are bioregional governances already. We have 2 in the United States, which is really interesting. In the Cascadia Northwest Pacific region, our U.S. states, Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, etc., are in a commons governance, bioregional governance with British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Yukon, and Canada, etc., to steward, not manage, but steward a common ecosystem because their future depends on it. Their business relationships, their employment, all depends on stewarding that ecosystem. We have another one called the bioregional governance of governors and premiers of the 8 U.S. states, the 2 Canadian provinces that share the Great Lakes. Now, this will interest folks. Those 5 Great Lakes that you read about in school all over the world, they're 20% of all the remaining fresh water on the entire planet. That's amazing. And so the 8 U.S. states and the 2 provinces in Canada, they share that common bioregion. They still have their states, they still part of their national governments, but they're sharing that bioregion to make sure they steward it rather than exhaust it, so that they're responsible for the future. So we're seeing an extension of governance, and the bioregion will become more important because when there's a a hurricane or a drought or a flood or a wildfire, everyone comes out in the local region. And because they have to help each other, the civil society, the businesses, it can't be just government. We're also realizing that the military is going to be changing its main mission all over the world. Right now, it's trying to protect fossil fuel deposits in order to maintain an industrial age. But increasingly, militaries are being called out instead for emergencies for climate events. So if there is an emergency and you have the flooding and the drought or the wildfires and heat waves, the military is coming in and working with local bioregions in order to prepare, rescue, restore. So even the great military institutes in the world in the last 2 years, and it's in the book Planet Opera, saying those are going to be the big crises. We're moving from military in a geopolitical world to military in a biosphere world, where increasingly our military will be there on the ground, helping the medical community, helping the local region in order to prepare, rescue, restore, and replenish local ecoregions that have to withstand these changes in the planet's water and hydro cycle. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence and AI, all right? Yes, it will play a role in the future of this planet, but we may not totally understand the role it's really going to play. We see AI as a way to move intelligence beyond the day-to-day intelligence that we human race have in our collective practices. There is a other role for AI, however, that's going to be more important. And that is, we're going to need AI, if you will, to help us manage and steward the infrastructure for a third industrial revolution for a biosphere world. And that is, AI will play an important adjunct role in helping us steward, if you will, the communication internet, converging with the solar and wind energy internet, connecting with the electric vehicles, fuel cell transport, mobility internet, connecting with the distributed water microgrids internet, connecting with the edge data centers internet. That's going to play an important role. It's going to be less important in terms of using it, if you will, as a second self that can have more intelligence than we have. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but let me give you one of the reasons. It's all about water. We know, for example, that these big global centers for artificial intelligence use a huge amount of energy. We know that, all right, for these data centers. But what's happening now is we're creating so much data that these big centralized data centers are already outmoded, but no one wants to talk about it. And what I mean is this. We're creating a brain and a nervous system for this planet. The brain is Galileo, GPS. The Chinese and Russians have their satellites. Those are brains out there monitoring the planet. The nervous system are billions and billions of sensors. We have IoT, Internet of Things sensors all over the world. They're the nervous system. They're in our ecosystems monitoring our planet. That's good. And what's happening with our plant and animal life. We have these IoT, if you will, sensors, and they're in their factories and smart homes and smart roads. They're going to have sensors all over the world. So we're creating a brain and a nervous system across our land masses. The interesting thing about that, it's helpful for infrastructure, but here's the problem. Not only do these big data centers use too much energy, they use a lot of water. And this is going to surprise everyone listening to me. And that is that computer chips. Each computer chip requires 8 gallons of pure water for that chip to become a chip. Did you hear that? We have right now 1.3 trillion chips last year produced. Each chip, 8 gallons of water. It gets even more interesting. And it has to do with how we use GPT, you know, and go up there and have conversations on the chat. Well, it turns out that every 10, I think it is, to 30 responses on a chat when you're GGB chatting, that's one bottle of water. We now have millions of people going up there chatting. Pretty soon it's hundreds of millions and perhaps billions. And each time you're chatting for a few minutes and you're getting a response, 10 to 20 or 30 responses, that's one bottle of water. It's not doable. It's absolutely not doable. So there'll be a role for AI, and there'll be some role for big data and chats, but mainly the purpose is going to be for AI is to help with bringing together the big data analytics and algorithms in a much more distributed world in local bioregions to be able to manage communication internet, the energy internet, solar and wind, the mobility and logistics internet, electric and fuel cell transport, the water internet, distributed microgrids, the edge data centers, et cetera. So the final thing is here, there's something called the latency factor. So what we're learning in the scientific community is that there's so much damn data emerging right now that we have something called the latency factor. So if you have an autonomous vehicle about to crash, and right now in San Francisco, I believe that the taxis are now autonomous, but if you have an autonomous vehicle about to crash, and you send that data to a remote big data center, it's too slow. It's called the latency factor. Even though it's quick, it's too slow and you crash. So edge data centers are coming in all over the world, just like we have microgrids for solar and wind, now microgrids for water. It's distributed, so everyone becomes the infrastructure. It's more democratic, et cetera. We're going to see edge data centers are already starting all over the world. So you will have local edge data centers in fluid networks organized by very sophisticated, high-tech, small and medium-sized enterprises, working with some global corporations as well, but they're going to be very, very distributed because of the latency factor. And this is called fog computing, not cloud computing. So in 30 years from now, this world's going to be very different. So it isn't going to be a geopolitical world of massive nation states alone with a handful of giant corporations. Some of them will survive for sure, but it's going to be more a mixed world, a biosphere world, where everyone's the infrastructure. If you have solar on your roof today or wind on your farm, you are the infrastructure. That's millions of people and pretty soon much of the human race. If you have edge data centers in your home or office or in your local neighborhoods, so you can create fluid networks in your local regions, you are the infrastructure. If you have electric vehicles that can send power back to the grid, you are the infrastructure. If you have a water microgrid that captures the water in your local neighborhoods, holds it in microgrids and distributes when you need it, you're the infrastructure. So we're used to these big centralized infrastructures of the first and second industrial revolutions, 19th and 20th century. In 30 or 40 years from now, if we get this right and roll up our sleeves, it's going to be a distributed infrastructure. There's no single company or country that can control the sun and the wind everywhere in the world. It's distributed. Or the water, it's distributed. And it goes on. And the computing, which is distributed. So I wrote Planet Aqua, Rethinking Our Home in the Universe. It's part of a sequel that started with the Third Industrial Revolution book, which was taken up by the Chinese leadership and Europe. Then the Zero Marginal Cost Society book, again, taken up. And then The Age of Resilience, the book we put out 2 years ago. And now the big one, Planet Aqua, Rethinking Our Home in the Universe. So there's opportunity, there's hope, there's a crisis. It creates new possibilities, but we are down to near zero time to get this in place. We could place this whole new infrastructure in place between now and 2050. But it requires new political will. It requires a new generation of young people moving out into our companies, into our governance, into our academia. It's a whole sweeping change, and the clock is ticking. The opportunities are there.